Hello, I am Pedro Mora, bringing you Pacific Media and now polling. Today we present Peter Prontzos from one of the workshops at the World Peace Forum. Peter Prontzos teaches political science at Langara College and Vancouver. His message today examines how military spending deviates the resources needed to abolish poverty, to optimize education, healthcare, social housing, etc. Here is Peter Prontzos.
And of course, Eisenhower, in addition to being a two-time U.S. president, was a five-star general who had led Allied forces in the European theater. And he said this early in his presidency, and this might have spooked some of the Birchers. He said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. The world in arms is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children." Pretty obvious, but especially in that context, one could see how that might have something to do with Marxism and the sense of labor theory value and all of that. What I want to talk about is a little bit of the context in terms of the military spending that goes on in the U.S. and around the world, and also put it in a little bit of historical context as well. One of the things to keep in mind is that this year the world is spending something like $1.5 trillion on the military. Even though conflicts have been going down, this has been a very significant trend. The number of people being killed, the actual number of conflicts, and the threats of conflict have been going down, especially since the end of the Cold War. And yet, even under Barack Obama, global military spending and U.S. military spending is increasing. In fact, Obama's signed on to the largest military budget in history, at worst, higher in relative terms than at the height of the Cold War. What's the threat? Well, obviously, that's something we'll get to in a minute. One of the other things that's significant is, according to UN estimates and other estimates, about 1/5 of what the world spends on the military every year could end global poverty if it was spent every year. So even if we didn't eliminate military spending, if we reduced it by 1/5 and took that amount, we could end global poverty. One of the most obvious examples of that money can be found, if it's necessary, of course, is the bailout of Wall Street and banks and so on, and Goldman Sachs and all of those corporations. Even under George Bush, supposedly a fiscal conservative and believes in market discipline and all that sort of thing, the U.S. came up with close to $1 trillion, at least in direct aid. And the CCPA has estimated that if you look at all the aid that's been given to corporations in the space of less than a year around the world, it's close to $11 trillion, which is what, again, 30, 40 times what it would take to end global poverty. So one of the things that's absolutely fundamental is to remember that there is no excuse, there are no real scarcities. There are all the scarcities, whether it's medical care, whether it's education, whether it's free time in the advanced countries, are all artificial. One study said, for instance, that the amount of money it would take to provide basic care, just basic health care, in poor countries would be $4 per person per year. Not much. In Cuba, they have a program to protect pregnant women and babies, even before they're born, and they have one of the lowest maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates in the world. The cost of providing a Cuban-style alternative around the world will be about the same as 6 fighter jets. So, Canada alone could say, we want to set an example for the rest of the world. We're going to not buy 6 more jets from the U.S. We're going to, have a different focus. And I wouldn't expect that to happen even under a government other than Stephen Harper. The total amount of money that the U.S. is, and again, it's hard to get exact numbers, but the U.S. is planning to spend this year on the wars, militarization and the wars, is over $700 billion. And the Pentagon is now asking for an extra 50 specifically to fight the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many people think that there's kind of a disconnect there, in terms of their priorities. But another point to keep in mind is that when we talk about militarization and war, the number of people who die from economic violence, from structural violence, again, basically poverty and lack of access to health care, food, and so on, is roughly 10 times as much as the number of people who are killed in direct combat. And if you look at the 20th century, which was the bloodiest century in human history, somewhere around 150 million people died in direct combat. Every year, about 40 to 50 million people die from economic violence, from structural violence. So the comparisons are basically insane, and yet it continues to happen. People believe that there's always been poverty. People believe there's not enough to go around. Every hour, so from the time I've started till about the time that I finish, 1,000 children around the world will die from preventable causes, primarily disease and hunger. That's one child about every 4 seconds. And every 4 seconds, the world spends $150,000 on the military. Now, I don't want to, on the other hand, I don't want to overemphasize it, because there's a lot of misunderstandings that we are naturally a violent species, that we are naturally selfish, which is garbage. But it's the situations and it's the power structures and it's the elites that, more than anything else, in terms of human behavior and society, that create these horrific realities. One other point, and again, many of you would be aware of this, that with the very dangerous situation we have regarding the environment, the military is the single largest polluter on Earth. We're paying people not only to prepare to kill each other, not only spending the hopes of our children, as Eisenhower said, but we're destroying our own nest. And then the question is, why do we allow this to continue? Because a point that I've been trying to stress in the last few years especially is that, and it's hardly original, but it's that these are societies created by human beings. And they only continue with whatever path they do because we allow it to. The majority of us do not say, no, we're just not going to follow orders anymore. We're not going to pay war taxes. We're not going to go off and kill people, other workers or farmers or human beings. We forget the really critical point that Einstein and Bertrand Russell made back in the 50s when they said, above all else, remember your humanity. And they were pretty smart people. And that works, in so many different ways. But when you remember your own humanity, as I will argue, you also remember the humanity of other people. But again, the basic question is, why do we allow this insanity to continue? Whether we're talking about preparations for nuclear annihilation, but also the daily horrors of economic violence. It's pretty hard not to know what's going on.
And they made the law.